To the at 4:37 a.m., approximately 37 kilometers south of the coast of Sri Lanka, a Los Angeles-class attack submarine was conducting one of its most classic tasks, tracking and destroying an enemy ship. About 13 kilometers ahead was the Iris Dina, one of the few remaining operational surface warships of Iran. The vessel was following a zigzag pattern at about 28 kilometers per hour, using active sonar to try to pinpoint the invisible threat that followed it in the depths. Soon, CENTCOM would give the submarine commander an order that no American captain had received since World War II. The submarine needed to solve a problem, to find a firing solution. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. The Dina was on high alert. Its active sonar sent constant pulses into the ocean, while the ASR 3D radar scanned the entire horizon around the ship. Every 3 to 5 minutes, the Iranian captain would randomly change course. Each change reset the American firing calculations. Submarines that hunt ships typically use passive sonar, which only detects the direction of sound, not distance. It's like using a compass instead of a map. You know where to go, but you don't know if the target is a kilometer away or 10. In the submarine's fire control room, the technician watched the Dina's heading line slowly advance on the screen. Every small movement was analyzed by target motion analysis (TMA) algorithms, which attempted to calculate the target's distance, speed, and course. Gradually, the firing solution began to take shape, like a blurred image that slowly comes into focus. But every time the calculation came close to an answer, the Iranian captain changed the ship's course. The green line on the screen disappeared, and half the work vanished. The process started all over again from scratch. It was like trying to judge the distance of a car just by the sound of its engine while the driver was constantly changing lanes. The captain of the Dina wasn't acting by chance. In the preceding weeks, he had participated in the multinational naval exercise, Milan 2026, alongside the Indian Navy, training for precisely this type of anti-submarine maneuver. Now, while an American submarine silently followed him in the depths, those maneuvers were the only advantage he still had. But that wasn't what worried the crew most. What truly concerned everyone was parked on the Dina's aft flight deck. The SH-3 Sea King anti-submarine warfare helicopter you see here carried a low-frequency dipping sonar designed specifically to do one thing: find submarines where hull-mounted sonar can't reach. Think of it this way. Dina's hull sonar screamed into the ocean from the surface, hoping for an echo. The submersible sonar descends straight into the submarine's living room. Sea King helicopter could neutralize the submarine's main advantage, the protection of the thermocline. By lowering a transducer attached to a cable below this thermal layer, the helicopter would be able to emit sonar pulses directly into the environment where the submarine was hidden, making it detectable. An experienced crew could sweep large areas of the ocean quickly, much faster than a surface ship. At a depth of about 120 meters, the submarine couldn't see anything on the surface, only hear. The sonar team tried to pick up any sign of the helicopter taking off, the sound of the turbine or rotor, but the noise of the ocean made everything difficult. If the Sea King took off, the Americans would have only two options: attack immediately or dive deeper and lose the opportunity. For now, the thermocline was still deflecting Dina's sonar pulses, making the submarine appear invisible. But this protection wasn't perfect. Phenomena called convergence zones could reflect sound over great distances and reveal the submarine unexpectedly. To make matters worse, measurements indicated that the thermal layer was thinning. This meant three risks were growing simultaneously. The helicopter could take off, the sonar could reflect off the convergence zones, and the thermocline itself, the submarine's main protection, was beginning to disappear. The thermal layer was weakening by the hour. Each new reading from the sensors came back warmer than the last, and the sonar chief estimated it would take 6 to 8 hours before the layer would cease to offer reliable concealment. The Dina was sailing roughly parallel to the coast of Sri Lanka at about 28 kilometers per hour. At its current course and speed, it would cross the 22-kilometer territorial boundary in approximately 40 minutes. And the moment that happened, firing would no longer be possible under international law, and on the aft flight deck, the Sea King remained fueled, armed, and just one order away from the captain to transform the submarine's hiding place into an open-air auditorium. Any one of those clocks running out would end the mission. All three were running simultaneously. So, at 0441, with the thermal layer weakening, the helicopter a simple launch away, and the fire control team struggling to resolve a zigzagging target amidst a noisy ocean, the submarine needed something it couldn't get down there. The CENTCOM operation authorization failed to reach operational depth. The extremely low-frequency ELF radio, the only signal capable of penetrating deep waters, carries almost no bandwidth. Think of it as the most expensive text message in the world, and all it can say is, "Call me." Enough to send the submarine afloat, but not enough to transmit the attack authorization for what was to come next. To receive the order, they would need to ascend to periscope depth. This meant ascending through the thermal layer that had kept them hidden, entering the water column where Dina's hull-mounted sonar worked best, and raising a communications mast above the waterline, entering the detection envelope of the ASR 3D radar that was scanning the sea for exactly the kind of small, momentary contact a periscope mast creates. A thin metal tube, barely above the surface, appearing for a few seconds. A single complete radar scan at the wrong moment, and an Iranian operator in a war stance staring at his screen receives the return he was hoping never to see. But the crew had a trick for it. A South Korean liquefied natural gas tanker, carrying about 200,000 tons of cargo, was moving through the maritime corridor about 8 kilometers to the southeast, producing a huge radar return on all radars within a radius of almost 90 kilometers. The submarine's navigator had been tracking that ship for an hour, waiting for the perfect geometry. If the submarine ascended to periscope depth exactly on the course between the tanker and the Dina, the mast would be within the cargo ship's radar shadow. Any return that the ASR radar detected would appear to be merely a ghost echo, a side reflection from the ship's 200,000 tons of steel, not a submarine. It's the radar equivalent of crossing a room by hiding directly behind someone taller than you. If the observer only sees one silhouette, they'll never know there were two. The Iranian operator would see the return flight, check the course, see the tanker ship right behind it, and dismiss it as interference. Submarine captains have been hiding behind merchant ships since the Cold War. That night, a South Korean gas tanker would unknowingly perform the most thankless service in naval history. At 0448, the geometry finally aligned. The officer on watch ordered the ascent. The submarine crossed the thermocline, the flow noise increasing in the hull, the heat shield disintegrating, the sonar image worsening as surface noise invaded the acoustic environment. 3 days of invisibility were exchanged for a few seconds with a mast above the waterline, hidden behind the radar shadow of a merchant ship. The communications mast broke through the surface, the satellite link lost connection, and message traffic began to descend. Authorization confirmed. The submarine dove again below the thermal layer. The thermocline closed over them like a door. On the fire control displays, Dina's course continued eastward, still navigating in a zigzag pattern, still emitting sonar pulses. But now, geography was beginning to tighten its grip. At 0451, the Dina's course ran parallel to the coast of Sri Lanka, about 37 kilometers offshore, with the 22-kilometer territorial limit located approximately 15 kilometers to the north. International law made those waters inviolable. If the Iranian captain became alarmed and turned towards the coast, the opportunity for attack would disappear. And a captain who saw his navy suffering the blows it had been suffering would have every reason to stay close to the coast. His crew would rather be interned by Colombo than be hit by a torpedo from something they couldn't even see. With each passing minute the submarine waited, the Dina drew closer to the line where a simple change of course would take it into that refuge. Another constraint still pressed from behind. The submarine continued to tow its towed sonar array, hundreds of meters of sensor cables stretched behind the vessel, its most sensitive ear. But the moment the torpedo was launched, if the submarine needed to maneuver abruptly, that array would become a leash. It's not possible to retrieve it quickly. Aggressive maneuvers risk tangling the cable or simply breaking it. The submarine's best sensor was about to become its biggest problem at the worst possible moment. At 04:53, the fire control team finally locked in the firing solution. The weapons officer programmed the Mark 48 ADCAP on Tube 1. The captain gave the order. And what happened next was the loudest sound the submarine would produce that entire day, in an ocean where Dina was listening precisely for that type of noise. The torpedo tube was flooded. Seawater rushed in to equalize the pressure with the outside, producing a sharp acoustic peak that a trained sonar operator recognizes in the same way a parent recognizes their own child's cry in a room full of people. Unmistakable. The crew gambled everything on the thermocline, the noise of maritime traffic, and the millions of shrimp snapping on the seabed to mask the worst moment of a submarine. If Dina's sonar team had picked up that sound through the ambient noise, the next 60 seconds would have been completely different. Mark 48 emerged from the tube. Approximately 53 centimeters in diameter, weighing roughly 1,600 kilograms of pure guided destruction, powered by Auto Fuel 2, a monopropellant that carries its own oxidizer, requires no air intake, and produces no exhaust bubbles that could give away the firing. Pump jet type propeller instead of a traditional propeller, no cavitation trail, no white line on the surface. The torpedoes that sank ships in 1945 left a visible trail pointing directly to the submarine that had fired them, a luminous arrow saying, "Fire here." The Mark 48 left nothing. The only signature was acoustic, the hum of the engine swallowed by the ambient roar of one of the busiest shipping lanes on the planet, a whisper inside a stadium. A very thin wire ran behind the weapon, connecting the torpedo to the fire control technician's console. Through this wire, the operator could guide the torpedo around obstacles, adjust its course if the target maneuvered, and even bypass the torpedo's own sensor if countermeasures confused it. Think of it as driving a car while holding only a wire attached to the steering wheel more than 13 kilometers away, blindfolded, while another person decides whether or not to cut the wire. The downside? The submarine was now practically stuck in place, locked in course and depth, unable to maneuver or escape any movement that could break that rope. If the wire broke, the torpedo would start operating on its own. Still dangerous, but with no one in control. And there were good reasons why someone would want to maintain control. At transit speed, the Mark 48 hears virtually nothing. The noise of the water flowing over its sonar sensors completely drowns out any sound of the ocean. The fire control technician guided blindly through the wire, watching the navigation data scroll on his screen, guiding a weapon at about 100 kilometers per hour through a maritime route where a wrong turn could put a warhead on a merchant ship. About 13 kilometers to the Dina, and rapidly decreasing. If the ship were to make an unexpected turn toward Sri Lankan territorial waters to the north, the technician would have only seconds to correct the torpedo's trajectory using a wire thinner than a pencil to a target the torpedo couldn't yet see. At about 9 kilometers, the Dina made another zigzag turn. The course changed on the fire control display, The technician adjusted the torpedo's gyroscopic course via the wire, bending the interception geometry to follow the new course. Each correction consumed more wire. Each degree of bend reduced the margin between a guided weapon and an extremely expensive noise generator. About 7 kilometers, the continental shelf off Gal, Sri Lanka, plunges abruptly into the deep waters of the Indian Ocean. The depth gradient squeezed the torpedo's performance envelope from all sides. Too shallow, and the weapon could surface. Too deep, and the race time would increase, giving Dina extra seconds to maneuver or escape. The three-dimensional space the navigator had been managing was shrinking with each kilometer. About 5 kilometers. Dina emitted another sonar pulse. The sound waves spread through the water, passing over the torpedo like a spotlight passing over a thief. The Mark 48 was small and fast enough that any return would appear on the Iranian screen only as marine life. Probably. That's a word submarine crews learned to live with. About 3 kilometers. The Mark 48 slowed down. The flow noise decreased, and the torpedo finally woke up. The internal sonar, an electronically controlled two-dimensional phased array sensor, began mapping the water ahead. Active pulses, high frequency, a frigate of about 1,500 tons displacing water at 28 kilometers per hour in the Indian Ocean is not exactly a discrete target. The sensor locked onto the Dina almost instantly. Terminal acquisition. The torpedo accelerated for the final run. Now the Dina heard it. Somewhere inside that ship, a sonar operator picked up the sound that every sailor in any navy in the world prays never to hear. Active pulses, approaching rapidly, steady course. Steady course means it's not passing by. He sounded the alarm. The bridge heard. The captain heard. 15 seconds separated that moment from the impact. 15 seconds. The Dina possessed acoustic decoys, disposable devices designed to deceive the torpedo's sensor and lure it away from the actual hull. But getting them into the water required recognizing the threat, authorizing countermeasures, and launching them into the sea. This sequence, even with a well-trained crew, typically takes more than 15 seconds. A sudden maneuver? A 1,500-ton frigate sailing at 28 kilometers per hour needs hundreds of meters to complete a turn. It didn't have hundreds of meters. The triple 324mm torpedo launchers on the aft deck could reach about 30 kilometers, but firing them required precise heading of the submarine, and that submarine was about 120 meters deep below the thermocline. Invisible. Untouchable. Patient. Dina could hear the torpedo coming, but she had no idea where it was coming from, even if the decoys had managed to get into the water, which would already be a big if. Behind the torpedo's sensor, via the wire, the fire control technician was ready to bypass the torpedo's brain and manually guide it through the noise directly to 1,500 tons of real steel. That was why the wire mattered. That was why the submarine had remained motionless throughout the entire run. The Mark 48 didn't hit the hull directly. It passed under the keel and detonated. The torpedo activated its magnetic fuse upon detecting the Dina's steel hull and detonated directly beneath the keel, the ship's most vulnerable point. The explosion created a massive bubble of superheated gas that expanded upward, lifting the 1,500-ton stern out of the water. For a moment, the frigate hung suspended without support. When the bubble collapsed, the stern fell and the keel broke, splitting the ship in two. Periscope images released hours later showed the bow rising as the stern sank, dragging the rest to the bottom. The 94-meter Iranian ship disappeared in the Indian Ocean. At 5:08 a.m., a distress call was sent, but when Sri Lankan rescue vessels arrived, only wreckage, oil slicks, and adrift lifeboats remained. Meanwhile, the American submarine had already returned silently below the thermocline, transmitting nothing and leaving no trace. The ocean closed over the area as if Dina had never existed.